December 26, 1944, 1650 hours. A Sherman tank, its hull scarred and muddy, crunched through the frozen tree line south of a besieged Belgian town. This was Cobra King, the lead tank of the 4th Armored Division, spearhead of General George Patton's relentless 3rd Army. Inside Bastogne, weary paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division watched as the tank made contact with their own forward engineers. The corridor was open. The siege was broken. As word spread through the frozen foxholes and shattered buildings, the long-awaited relief had finally arrived. The tankers of Patton's army expected gratitude, perhaps celebration from the men they had fought so hard to reach. They expected to be hailed as rescuers. What they received instead was a message. Not a message of thanks, but a declaration of identity. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cold, stubborn pride of men who had stared into the abyss for 7 days and never blinked. The men of the 101st Airborne looked their would-be saviors in the eye and told them they had never needed rescuing in the first place. This is the story of why they said it, what it meant, and how 7 days of ice, steel, and blood forged not just a military victory, but an unshakable legend. The journey to that moment began in chaos. On December 18, 1944, the 101st Airborne Division, resting and refitting after the brutal campaign in Holland, was hurled into open-top trucks. They raced 100 miles through icy roads, a confused and desperate response to a catastrophe few understood. Most thought they were heading to a quiet defensive sector. Instead, they arrived in Bastogne just 4 hours ahead of the spearheads of the German 5th Panzer Army. What had hit the American lines was Adolf Hitler's last great gamble, Operation Whacked 'em Rhine. More than 200,000 German troops and 1,000 tanks had exploded through the thinly held Ardennes forest, a region Allied High Command had dismissed as unsuitable for major attack. Fog and snow grounded the overwhelming Allied air power, and the German advance, achieving complete surprise, threatened to split the Allied front and reach the port of Antwerp. In this maelstrom, Bastogne was not just another town. It was the cork in the bottle. 7 paved highways converged in its small center, a fact that made it the absolute key to mobility in the Ardennes highlands. The Germans needed those roads to fuel their westward dash. The Americans needed them to shore up their broken front and eventually counterattack. General Troy Middleton, commanding the VII Corps, had one order for the 101st: hold Bastogne at all costs. The man tasked with executing that order was the division's acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. His superior, Major General Maxwell Taylor, was in Washington when the storm broke. What McAuliffe found upon arrival was not a defensible position, but a swirling tide of confusion. Shattered units streamed west through the town. Reports of German movements were contradictory and panicked. With a calm that would define the coming week, McAuliffe and his staff performed a miracle of improvisation. They established a defensive perimeter around Bastogne, a rough circle about 16 miles in circumference. Each of the division's 4 parachute and glider infantry regiments took a sector. They were joined by crucial fragments of other units, teams from the 10th Armored Division's Combat Command B, which became a mobile fire brigade, and the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, whose guns were carefully sighted to cover likely armored approaches. The position was audaciously thin. The perimeter was too large to hold in depth, gaps were inevitable, supplies were a critical problem. The division had moved with only the ammunition and rations they carried. Their heavier artillery shells were still in dumps far to the rear. Medical supplies were sufficient for a peacetime garrison, not for a sustained siege. Most hauntingly, the winter was brutal. Temperatures plunged well below freezing, and many paratroopers lacked proper cold weather gear, their jumpsuits and light coats inadequate against the biting wind and snow. They dug their foxholes into the iron-hard earth, knowing they would have to hold with what they had. By December 20th, the noose tightened completely. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division pressed from the north and east. Elements of the Panzer Lehr and the 2nd Panzer Division, though mostly bypassing the town to continue west, left strong screening forces to the south and west. Bastogne was surrounded. For the German command, the surrounded garrison was an irritant, a not to be reduced quickly so their vital roads could be fully secured. They expected the Americans, isolated and cut off, to wither or break. They did not understand the men they had trapped. The 101st Airborne was not a standard infantry division. It was an elite formation, a community of volunteers forged in the hard school of airborne training. These men had already jumped into the dark over Normandy on D-Day and fought through the hedgerows. They had jumped again into the Netherlands for Operation Market Garden. Being surrounded was not a catastrophe to them. It was a fundamental condition of their purpose. Their entire doctrine was based on landing behind enemy lines, holding isolated positions, and waiting for link-up. Bastogne, though arrived at by truck instead of parachute, was just another objective to hold. This psychological framing was their first, and perhaps greatest, weapon. The attacks began in earnest. German infantry, supported by tanks and assault guns, probed and assaulted the perimeter. The fighting was desperate and close quarters. Paratroopers with bazookas, often letting tanks roll over their foxholes to fire at the thinner rear armor, dueled with Mark IVs and Panthers. The 705th's tank destroyers, hidden in ambush positions, exacted a heavy toll. Artillery forward observers, calling in fire from the division's howitzers, broke up infantry formations. The paratroopers held villages with names like Marvy, Neff, and Champs with a ferocity that baffled German commanders. They were not just defending, they were launching local counterattacks to reclaim lost ground. Their morale, against all conventional military logic, remained high. They trusted their non-commissioned officers. They believed in their regimental commanders, and they saw McAuliffe's unflappable confidence as a reflection of their own capability. It was against this backdrop of defiant confidence that the German command decided to try a formal approach. On the morning of December 22nd, under a flag of truce, 4 German soldiers approached the lines of the 327th Glider Infantry. They carried a typed ultimatum, written in English. It stated the obvious military reality. Bastogne was surrounded by powerful German armored units. Further resistance, it warned, would lead to annihilation by artillery and air attack. It concluded with an offer: surrender within 2 hours, and the Americans would receive the honorable treatment of prisoners of war, refuse, and face total destruction. The ultimatum was delivered to a sleepy General McAuliffe, who was catching a rare moment of rest. Awoken with the news, his initial groggy response was a single incredulous word: nuts. As he fully awoke and conferred with his staff, the question became how to formally reply. Some suggested a lengthy military rebuttal, but Colonel Joseph Harper, commander of the 327th, understood the moment. He argued that McAuliffe's first instinct was perfect. The official reply, typed and delivered to the bewildered German party, read in its entirety: to the German commander, nuts, the American commander. The German officers, blindfolded and escorted back to their lines, did not understand the idiom. The American escorts translated helpfully: it means go to hell. The story of the nuts reply raced through the frozen perimeter like an electric current. It was not just defiance. It was the perfect expression of the division's attitude, dismissive, contemptuous of the enemy's threat, and utterly lacking in the grandiose formality of traditional warfare. It was the message of the 101st Airborne to the outside world: we are not afraid, we are not impressed, and we are not surrendering. McAuliffe's defiance was not mere bravado. It was calculated. He knew 2 things the German ultimatum implied he did not. First, weather forecasts predicted a break in the clouds within a day. That meant Allied air power, the juggernaut that had been grounded, could return. Second, through coded radio messages, he knew that Patton's Third Army was already on the move, turning north in a forced march to relieve them. His job was to hold, and he was confident his men could hold long enough. The German response to the rejection was a storm of steel. Artillery fire intensified, pounding Bastogne's center. Luftwaffe bombers made nighttime raids. Ground attacks grew in strength and frequency, probing for a soft spot. Yet the nuts response had a perverse effect on German morale. It signaled that the Americans inside Bastogne were not a demoralized garrison awaiting deliverance, but a determined force willing to fight to the end. Reducing them would now cost more time and more blood than the German offensive timetable could afford. On December 23rd, the forecast proved right. The skies cleared to a brilliant, cold blue. The sound of aircraft engines was at first a cause for alarm, then for jubilation. Not German planes, but American. First came the P-47 Thunderbolts, screaming down to strafe and bomb German positions with pinpoint accuracy. Then came the slow, beautiful sight of C-47 cargo planes. Parachutes bloomed in the sky, delivering precious cargo, ammunition for rifles, machine guns and artillery, medical supplies and food. While some fell into German hands, enough reached the defenders to materially extend their ability to fight. The air resupply was a lifeline, but more importantly, it was a signal. You are not forgotten. The world outside knows you are here, and help is coming. That help was driving north in a colossal maneuver that military theorists would have deemed impossible. On December 19th, at a grim emergency conference in Verdun, Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower had asked General George Patton how quickly he could disengage his Third Army from its fighting in the Saar region, pivot 90 degrees, and attack north to relieve Bastogne. Patton's answer stunned the room. "I can attack in 3 days with 3 divisions." To most, it was a reckless boast. The logistical challenge of moving an entire Army Corps over 100 miles on icy roads in winter, while reorienting all supply lines and planning a new attack into enemy flank, was staggering. But Patton was not bluffing. A meticulous planner beneath his bravado, he had anticipated the possibility of a German counteroffensive and had his staff prepare contingency plans for just such a pivot. Upon leaving the conference, he called his headquarters and issued the code phrase, "Play ball." A pre-designed machinery sprang into motion. In one of the most brilliant logistical feats of the war, the Third Army turned north. The 4th Armored Division, chosen to spearhead the relief, led the charge. In 19 hours, they moved 151 miles from Lorraine to the battle zone. Over 2 days, more than 130,000 men and 60,000 vehicles executed the turn. Traffic control was perfect. Supplies flowed. By December 22nd, exactly as promised, Patton's III Corps attacked northward toward Bastogne. The advance was not a triumphant romp. It was a brutal, grinding fight through winter-blasted terrain. Narrow roads confined the American armor to frontal attacks against dug-in German defenders from the 5th Fallschirmjäger and Panzer Lehr divisions. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. Patton, visiting forward units, famously declared the awful weather was perfect for fighting and insisted the attack press on, day and night. The 4th Armored Division's Combat Command B, under the driven leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, absorbed heavy losses but inched forward, a battering ram aimed at the heart of the German encirclement. For 4 days, the two narratives unfolded in parallel. Inside the perimeter, the 101st endured, repelling attacks and conserving their hard-won airdrop supplies. Outside, Patton's tankers and infantry fought a bloody, incremental battle to reach them. The link-up was not a sure thing. German resistance was ferocious, and time was running out. Finally, on the afternoon of December 26th, a breakthrough. A task force led by Lieutenant Charles Boggess in the Sherman tank Cobra King found a seam in the German lines south of Bastogne. Pushing through the woods near the village of Assenois, they broke into the open ground leading to the American lines. At 1650 hours, Cobra King reached the forward positions of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion of the 101st. The physical siege of Bastogne was over. The tankers, exhausted and elated, emerged from their hatches expecting to be mobbed by grateful infantry. They had images of a starving, desperate garrison finally saved. The reality was different. The paratroopers who greeted them were certainly relieved, but their relief was professional, not emotional. They were gaunt, dirty, and steely-eyed. They offered handshakes, not hugs, and then they delivered their message. It was phrased in different ways, but the essence was consistent. What took you so long? We were fine. We didn't need you to get here, but the supplies will be welcome. The sentiment was captured perfectly by one paratrooper's reported quip to a fourth armored soldier. We're just glad you boys could join the party. This was not ingratitude, as some in Patton's army initially felt. This was the articulation of a profound and hard-earned truth. The 101st Airborne had accomplished its mission. They had been ordered to hold Bastogne. They had held it. They had never been defeated, never been close to being overrun. In their minds, Patton's arrival did not save them. It linked up with them. It restored their land-based supply lines and allowed for the evacuation of wounded. It was the next phase of the operation, not the end of a disaster. This message, that they never needed rescuing, became the core of the Bastogne legend for the 101st. It was born from their elite identity. Airborne troops were, by design, men who operated cut-off. Their training, their ethos, their very reason for being was to hold isolated positions against superior forces until relieved. Bastogne was the ultimate validation of that doctrine. To admit they needed saving would have been to admit their fundamental concept of operations was flawed. Their stubborn pride was a point of honor, rooted in the objective fact that they had, against all odds, succeeded. The tension between this perception and the view from outside created a lasting historical debate. Veterans of the 4th Armored, who had lost friends and comrades fighting through hell to break the ring, naturally saw themselves as liberators of a besieged and desperate garrison. Historians who side with this view point to the dwindling supplies, the mounting casualties, the intense pressure of the final German attacks. They argue that, without Patton's relief, the 101st would have eventually been overwhelmed or forced into a catastrophic breakout attempt. The 101st counterargument is one of cold military calculus. Yes, supplies were low, but the airdrops had replenished them. Yes, casualties were significant by the battle's end. The division would suffer 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 missing. But the unit was not combat ineffective. The defensive perimeter, though tested, remained intact. German attacks had been repulsed with heavy loss. They believed they could have held for several more days, if not indefinitely. The truth, as is often the case, lies in the strategic outcome, not the hypothetical. The 101st did hold. Patton did break through. The German offensive was stopped and then reversed. The combined action was a masterpiece of American arms. When General Patton himself visited Bastogne on December 30th to award medals, the dynamic was palpable. He praised the 101st in glowing terms, calling their stand the finest achievement of its kind in the history of the American Army. Yet, even in his praise, he framed it as a defense that needed relief. Many paratroopers listened, accepted their bronze stars and silver stars, but held quietly to their own narrative. They appreciated the compliment, but they knew what they had done. They were not survivors, they were victors. The legacy of that message has endured for 80 years, woven into the fabric of the 101st Airborne Division. They adopted the nickname the Battered Bastards of Bastogne, a title that embraces the hardship while flaunting the defiance. The nuts response is celebrated not just as a funny anecdote, but as the ultimate expression of their spirit. And the message delivered to Patton's tankers on December 26, that they never needed rescuing, is the internal heart of the legend. It is a testament to the power of unit identity, of belief that transcends material circumstance. It is the belief that they are not just soldiers, but airborne, and airborne soldiers hold. The Battle of the Bulge would rage on through January of 1945, the costliest battle the United States Army fought in the European theater. Bastogne was one critical point in that vast struggle, but its symbolism overshadowed all others. For Patton and the Third Army, The relief validated his aggressive philosophy and legendary command style, proving that speed, audacity, and meticulous preparation could achieve the impossible. For the American public, the story of the surrounded division and the general who said, "Nuts," provided a desperately needed narrative of unbreakable resilience in a moment of deep crisis. But for the 101st Airborne, the meaning was more profound. Bastogne was their crucible. It proved that their elite status was not just a matter of training or equipment, but of character. The message they sent when the link-up was made was not one of hostility toward their rescuers, but one of fidelity to themselves and to the successful completion of their duty. It was the message of a unit that had looked at impossible odds and seen only another mission they had held. That was all the message they needed to send. And in that simple, stubborn fact, a legend was born that would forever define the Screaming Eagles, the battered bastards who never needed rescuing because they had never considered themselves lost. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment to encourage me for making such videos. See you in the next video.